Thank you very much, Bridget, for that warm welcome, and thank you all for being here on a Saturday afternoon. It's a pleasure to see so many people who are interested in the topic, and I hope you enjoy the exhibition. I'm a huge fan of Bridget. I know that you all know how lucky you are to have her. And I came and visited a few years ago because I was really inspired to see your facility here. It's such a beautiful space. It's such a beautiful place to showcase gorgeous exhibitions, and I'm thrilled at how the exhibition looks thanks to Bridget and her team's hard work here. So what I thought I'd do in this talk is give you more of a sense of some of the details that sometimes it's hard to see even when you're standing in front of the object unless you know how to look at the object. And what you're seeing now is an installation shot of how the exhibition premiered at the Newark Museum. So you can see first off that we use some very strong wall colors. But it really set off some of the objects in a different way, and it's one of the interesting things about seeing the same exhibition in more than one venue is seeing the objects take new life in each venue. So as you can see here, I'm going to kind of zoom in on the first section, which is the same section that we start with here at the exhibition, which is really introducing people to the 5 pillars of Islam. Many people don't know much about Islam, and so to quote The Sound of Music, we'll start at the very beginning. And so the beginning is the 5 pillars, which include charity or almsgiving, fasting for Ramadan, the sacred month, prayer 5 times a day, the Shahada or the declaration of faith, and the pilgrimage to Mecca. And we're actually going to begin to explore the exhibition through that last pillar, the pilgrimage to Mecca. So if you are physically and financially able, this is one of the important pillars that you are trying to acquire. And this object on the far side is a very, very small book, pocketbook, travel book, literally, that you have in the exhibition. This is just one leaf of it. But if you haven't seen what the Kaaba actually looks like, I thought I'd show you what an absolutely realistic rendition this painting is. The Kaaba is the black box in the center. Actually, it's a sacred stone within that box. And that box is draped with very luxurious silks that are beautifully embroidered or woven with sacred prayers. And you see all of the pilgrims in the white dressed and ihram for the men who are circumambulating, going around that sacred stone. And you see in the drawing the circular space that is created, that kind of courtyard that's created around the Kaaba, as well as the red mountains behind and the spires, the minarets that that are the place that you can call out to prayer from. On the other side of this book is the sacred site. And then I also wanted to pull back and give you a night view. And if I don't want you to be taken away from objects in the museum, but there's something fascinating also about seeing these things in motion. And if you go to YouTube and you search Kaaba on YouTube, you will see a constant sea of people moving around. And there's about 10 or 12 different really fascinating documentaries about pilgrimage to Mecca, looking at pilgrims leaving from China, from India, from the US, from Texas, actually, going to Saudi Arabia to visit Mecca and Medina and then returning. And it's really fascinating to see exactly that global impact. In China, because the population is so large, you have to apply in a special line in a queue. You have to hope that your lottery number comes up so that you are, even if you have the money, it's still a numbers game about how many people get to go from China. And they charter special planes that fly you directly from China to Saudi Arabia. When we had the exhibition in Philadelphia, I was really amazed I met 7 Hajis, both men and women, who had made the pilgrimage to Mecca more than one time. And it's really a phenomenal and unique aspect that's the only religion that requires of all its participants, if they're able to go to the same spot. And that's a very, very powerful thing, and it's a powerful thing for art. Neighboring to this is the sacred city of Medina, and here we have an image from the book in the exhibition, and there is the green dome over the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad. And that's where you see that resonance between those two pieces. So we're discussing this kind of center and periphery of trade. we're going to look at several examples of how that plays out in physical artworks. And here, what you're seeing are things that, if you didn't have the handy text, you might say that these were potentially all made in the same place at the same time, because they're all ceramics, and they roughly have these same 3 colors of glaze. But in reality, the 2 pieces on this side closer to me were made in Eastern Iran, whereas the 3 pieces on that side were all made in China. And they're made in part to imitate each other on multiple levels. So the thing that looks like a teacup is a Chinese clay homage, imitation, inspiration from a metal teacup. So traditionally, Chinese tea glasses would not have that circular handle. It would just be a cup without a handle. And if you visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you will find silver teacups that are Tang Dynasty that are made of metal as well. But this is a clay example. So this is both premiering this 3-color glaze as well as the form that is this clay handle. Below is this vegetal shape. We actually don't know what this was made for. And I had a number of specialists come to me and say, are you sure about this? We haven't seen things like this before. And this came into the Newark Museum collection in 1941. And I said, I know you haven't seen things like this before, but I'm really sure about this. And I'm sure about this in part because I think it relates to a particular kind of seed pod. So it was a foreign seed pod, a seed casing. And I had a researcher come and work with me last year who specialized in early ceramics and was delighted to tell me that about 3 years ago, they did a new excavation in China and found a nearly identical piece to this that is just coming out of the ground now. So without a doubt, it's a fascinating import of trade. And then you see often tomb figures. Many people are familiar with camels, crossing those deserts. The camels were the convoy trucks that were bringing these trades back and forth. And what you're seeing astride the horse is not a Han Chinese person, but a Western trader or a foreigner. And that is related to the kinds of traders that would be coming out of the Islamic lands. And on this side, also the types of clay are completely different between the Chinese example and the Eastern Iranian. The Eastern Iranian ceramics are fired at a lower temperature and do not have the same consistency in the clay. They're more brittle. But the other fascination for me, specifically this footed cup, the stem cup, there's 2 resonances for that. In the Chinese tradition, you will also find stem cups or footed cups, but you will also find these in Armenia used for the Eucharist in Christian churches. So the reason why the exhibition is called Art and Islam Through Time and Place is that it's really looking how Islamic forms can be used in and of and for Muslim practice, or how the art that is coming out of a Muslim tradition is used by resonant traditions that are neighbors to. And so this is our first iteration, which you're looking at between the 8th and 10th centuries of this wave of exchange of these materials. And then we fast forward to everyone's favorite blue and white wares. So the 2, here we flip-flop the slides. So the 2 examples on the far side are Iranian from the Safavid period, and the examples on the near side, these 3 examples were made in China. Now, blue and white wares would not exist in this world if it weren't for the trade between China and the Middle East, because initially cobalt, which is the mineral that produces that beautiful blue, was mined successfully in the Middle East and exported to China. So the Chinese use of cobalt was predicated on being able to trade with Middle Eastern sources of cobalt. Later, China figured out how to mine their own local sources of cobalt, but before, without them, you wouldn't have that interaction. And this very large jar, which is highlighted in the exhibition in the center with this wonderful lotus pattern on it, we find examples like this of this period, which is a 16th century jar, huge jar. There are many of them that survive in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul today. So we know that they were physically made and traveled from China, from the imperial courts of China to the Ottoman courts of Turkey, on the backs of camels, horses, and carts, by sea, by land and by sea. These things would come and go. And then on the far side, part of the other thing that's interesting, as we were talking about for the previous group of ceramics, these are made out of different types of clay. So the Chinese ones are high-fired porcelain, but the Safavid periods are still fired at a lower temperature, and that's part of the reason why their color is so different than the Chinese examples. Just as we had the Chinese imitating the metal forms from the Middle East, we also have Safavid Iran imitating Chinese forms, but with their own, not imitating, inspired by. So if you look in the lower example with that round section with these flowers that kind of look like butterflies radiating, that relates to a kind of pattern that you find in the Chinese market. And then above, those are actually two quail, those little fat birds on the ground, but they don't look like the way that Chinese would draw quail. And so that you have to look at the manner in which the flowers and the animals are drawn that show resonance with each other and yet are drawn differently in different locales. And then there's a third layer to this trade in these two examples close to me. In the top one, that ceramic piece is imitating a metal form of a pitcher. And you find those styles of pitcher being used predominantly in Buddhist areas as well, in Tibet. But you find them as libation, both for drinking, for normal drink, as well as for religious purposes in the Middle East. This shape of this Augur with the handle and the spout, and the way that the spout is connected by that extra connection for strength. But the silver lid on top of that was not made in China. The silver lid on top of that and this shiny silvery foot here were made by Tiffany's. In Newark. Newark, New Jersey is where all Tiffany silver and Tiffany enamelware was made, and these examples were made retrofitted when they went to an even more global market. And so that's the iteration of this kind of global trade for these examples. One final example of this particular style of resonance is you see the Spanish plate and the Iranian plate. And they're both using a similar style of glaze called lusterware, this kind of gold-brown glaze. And this was the hot thing, and being able to crack the technology of learning how to do that glaze was something that was kept as a monopoly for a long time. And when it eventually was understood in Spain, then you could see that earlier 13th century technology still being made in 15th and 16th century Spain. But the thing that I think is also interesting about the Spanish example is, can you guess what animal that is? Antelope's a great guess. Ibis is a great guess. All of those are all in the right realm. Other people will think that it might even be a rabbit because they wouldn't look closely at the cloven feet, and they would see the horns as ears. So we're gonna come back to him in a bit, but he's frolicking among grape leaves. Grape leaves are behind him. So we're gonna think more about him in a minute, and then we're going to turn to this other resonance of international exchange. This is the front and the back of the same piece on view in the exhibition. It's a board that you write on to memorize the Quran. In Algeria, and it was acquired by the founder of our museum, John Cotton Dana, when he traveled to North Africa in the 1920s. And the way that these boards work is much like a colonial American slate board. You would write on it and you would wash it off, and you would write on it and you would wash it off. But when you washed off the words of God, the ink of the words of God, you didn't just bang the erasers outside. It had power in it, and so you would retain the ink water, and you would use that ink water as a special blessing. And then, once you had memorized all of the Quran or the portions that were assigned to you, you might decorate the board like this and keep one of your favorite surahs on the board as almost like a diploma of graduation. On the far side, the decoration, you can see the 3 cypress trees at the bottom. So cypress trees, being evergreen, are a perfect emblem for paradise, especially if you are raised in a desert environment. The idea that a tree can stay forever green is the perfect entrance to paradise. But above it, floating in the air, as it were, are these 2 golden fish. And above them, in the center, is a white lotus flower. And then arcing above the white lotus flower are blue, red, and yellow wish-granting gems. Now, people who study Buddhist art will recognize the lotus flower, the golden fish, and the wish-granting gems as 3 of the 8 emblems of Buddhism. And that's because if something is a powerful emblem, it becomes absorbed in different ways. And so you will see on many of the objects in the exhibition a 6-pointed star. And some people will say, well, isn't that Jewish? Well, yes, and it's Muslim, and it's Hindu, and it's Buddhist. And wish-granting gems, I think you can all guess that people the world over would love to have wish-granting gems, and that they represent not just material wealth, but spiritual wealth. In terms of the 2 golden fish, you are here on a coastal environment, so you can appreciate the importance of fish to one's livelihood. But fish in a Mamluk context in northern Egypt, you can see the fish pool in the center of this basin that's in the exhibition. Fish in a fish pool represent light on the water, and therefore God's grace on the water. So that fish has a resonance of abundance, but it also has a resonance of sunlight and of God's love. But it's not an accident that the fish appear in a bowl like this, because this bowl would have been potentially also an eating bowl, and we know that fish can be very good eating, as is in this tray, where the fish become an even more complicated vision to see. So here we've got pools of fish who are just jumping in a wonderful geometric pattern, but then you also have them swimming over and under each other all throughout, interspersed with fabulous inscriptions that are all usually homages to one's relationship not only with God, but with being a good guest and a good host. And then at the edge, it's a little harder to see. It's easier in this example to see in person once you know to look. There are horned goats back to front. More good eating on the tray. So, and we'll come to this final example that blends this exchange between East and West as well as with writing. So these are 2 hats that are made in Sulawesi in Indonesia, in the Bone Regency by the Buginese royalty. And this dark brown example with a lovely gold section is the kind that a high aristocratic man might wear. It's a Muslim form, a sacred cap covering your head, and he would wear this before he had finished his Hajj, before he had finished his pilgrimage. But if he was able to complete that pilgrimage, he would get a white one. And it's not just that it's white, it's actually inscribed here and here. You see those faint vertical lines? And that says Hajj, Hajj. So he gets to double advertise that he's been to the Hajj. I had the good fortune yesterday to spend a glorious amount of time at the Museum of Fine Arts here in Houston, which has many spectacular things. And I wanted to say that while the Glassell collection has a wonderful brown hat like this, it's actually really speaks to how special this material has a place in Houston, because to my knowledge, there's really only 5 of these hats in the Americas, and you have 2 of them here in Houston. So you may think that because you have this already at the MFA and there's one here, that they're a dime a dozen, but they are not. They are not. They are really, really special, and it's actually such an honor to be able to physically be able to look at this example here and then go see the example in the MFA and compare and contrast the way that they're woven. So if you look at this pattern here, you can see what looks like what sometimes is called a Chinese key. And if you can recall your world map, of course, Indonesia is on the sailing route between southern China and Mecca and back again. So you've got this layer that the form of the hat comes from the Middle East, the patterning comes from China, the inscription, the Hajj, and then this use of white and dark for imitating a completed Hajj versus a non-completed Hajj. And that's our perfect segue to another section of the exhibition, the Declaration of Faith, or elegant epigraphy writing as art. Now, this object is not in the exhibition, but I'm going to finish this talk with a kind of globe-trotting view of mosques of the world, and I wanted to start this section with this building because while it's fabulous in space age, and while these minarets here are just elegant and look like curls, if you understand the tradition, you will see them not just as minarets, but as a stylus. a pen. And they're not just a pen that's waiting to be used, it's a pen that has already written the word Allah or God. So this patterning between the windows and the not windows is an inscription itself. Phenomenal, right? And I'm going to have you all ponder on where in the world you think this building might be, and I'll tell you later at the end of the program. I only wish, but thank you for thinking so. So what I thought I'd do is I thought I'd give you a tutorial on scripts. So I think we can all read 1, 2, 3, which is in the English language using a Latin script and the Calligraphy font. So here we have 1, 2, 3, still in the English language in a Latin script, but using a brush script font. So here we have 2 ways of doing calligraphy. But in the exhibition, it's not just changing the font that you're looking at, you're also looking at a different notation entirely. So you know what these numerals are called, right? Arabic numerals. Well done, well done. Do you know what these numerals are called? Excellent. Okay, final check. This one? It's the Chinese notation that is used throughout East Asia. So it's Chinese, it's Japanese, it's Korean, depending on how you talk about language versus script. So when we start talking about scripts in the exhibition, you'll hear words like Nashtali, Toulouse, like very different names of different styles of script. And sometimes it's just the font, but sometimes it's a completely different language. It's a language like Urdu versus Farsi versus Turkish. These are languages that don't have anything linguistically to do with each other. And one of the great strengths of the exhibition is looking also at the types of books that were written that were not just the Quran. As important as the Quran is, there's also a wealth of books that talk about poetry and science and math. And at the MFA, there's a spectacular early anatomy book that they have on view right now. But these 2 sheets are from the same story, but 2 different books about the same story. And it's a great hero's story. And it's always easy to tell this hero, who's called Rustam, because he wears a tiger skin armor. And you see in both of these, he's sleeping. So it's always fascinating to me how often this hero is sleeping. But it's actually, it's a huge poetic novel. It's an epic, like when you studied the Odyssey or the Iliad. And it's written in poetic form, written by a very, very famous poet. And you see the poetry calligraphed on the top and the bottom of this sheet and the following sheet. And it's also about a relationship between a man and his horse. Because in both of these, his horse, Raksh, is saving him. So here, he's saving the sleeping master from a tiger attack, and there, the horse is attacking the demon. The white div, is trying to throw Rustam into the ocean. So there's this wonderful relationship between a man and his horse. In fact, it's said that the horse Raksh can only be ridden by Rustam, and Rustam only sought for the horse Raksh. And so it's a wonderful buddy tale, a tale of adventure and mystery. And there's some beautiful examples of this same epic also illustrated at the MFA. But in addition to this long line of historic calligraphy, and these are from 2 different periods of time. The one closer to me is a 16th century piece, and the other one is a 19th century piece. So you can see some of the conservative nature of the way in which the mountains and the trees are portrayed, but also some of the vibrancy of the colors as different colors come in and different fashions come in. And speaking of vibrant colors and different fashions, these are some contemporary works by the artist named Hassan Massoudi, who trained in Iran and then traveled to Paris and currently has a studio in Paris. And each one of these is a poem. And each poem is written both large and small. So you see this that looks like a helmet, as well as this that looks like a teardrop, is part of the calligraphy. And then within each of these is more calligraphy. And he chooses poets that really inspire him. And he chooses them from all over the world. So famous Sufi poets from India and from Iran and from Turkey, but also people like Ben Franklin. And so this poem here is a version that basically says, the early bird gets the worm. And he does these amazing workshops. The other thing is that unlike Chinese or Korean or Japanese calligraphy that's done with a brush, most Islamic-based calligraphy is done, although there is Chinese calligraphy done with a brush in Islamic tradition, most of this calligraphy is done with a stylus. And these large pieces he does with a piece of board that are larger like this. And he'll dip it in the ink and calligraph with his whole body. So it becomes that calligraphic dance. And I highly recommend you go on Vimeo or YouTube and look up this artist, because there's some great images of how he's has his colors on the wall and is making this calligraphy. And he's been collaborating with a graffiti artist in Paris, a very famous graffiti artist. And they have this great moment where he's doing his practice and the graffiti artist is doing his practice on the same wall. And the graffiti artist, of course, the spray can is an extension of his arm, whereas this master with this kind of thing, where it looks like he breathes and he does calligraphy, he's struggling to adapt to the spray can as the new form for the calligraphy. So it's very much a vibrant and continuing tradition of calligraphy, and we see that also in this wonderful pair of works by the artist Victor Ekpok, who's a Nigerian artist based in Washington, D.C., and he's titled the piece, "Should the Moon Meet Us Apart, May the Sun Find Us Together." And I think you can see which one is the sun and which one is the moon, and that the sun, the red sun, is above this beautiful blue form on a light colored board, whereas the moon is, you can see kind of almost a blue moon backlit from a golden full moon with this these red lines. Well, these lines are also a form of script. They're called an Nsibidi script, and they're an ideographic language of Nigeria, indigenous to Nigeria. And the form is a writing board. The top part is a handle that you can put your hand on, and the curve is supposed to go around your belly. So you can practice writing the Quran. That's one of the ways that these boards were used. They were also used for painting. So he's taken that form of the board and created multiple forms of calligraphy on it. That blue example there, may the sun find us together, that symbol that is the two bars crossing is the symbol of marriage. And the red one looks very much like a symbol for a river. So there's all this wonderful resonance and layering of meaning in this kind of form of calligraphy. But you also find, one of the things that I think it's difficult for us today to think about is what a precious thing the ability to read is. Because historically, most people did not know how to read. Only a few people knew how to read. So the power of writing meant that it could be used as an amulet. Because, of course, if you can't read something, it must be so much more powerful. Because you can imagine and project into this writing all these possibilities that you don't know because you can't read it. And so on the blade, this is a double-formed blade, you can see inscribed onto it a number of amuletic properties to make the blade more effective. And you'll see in a lot of the arms and armor over there, lots of inscriptions, and many of those blades were actually made for prestige. They weren't really made for battle. This is also an amuletic form of script. So you see all of these wonderful wishes for good life in the hand of Fatima, Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad. And each finger represents a member of the Holy Family. And you can see the same hand in a abstracted form on the fibula. So the far side, you see these are three little hands coming down. So that's something that can be both worn on the body as a form of protection, or like this hand would be placed on a wall or by an entranceway to guard the threshold for welcoming goodness into the house and repelling bad things from the house. And you see the six-pointed star right there, right? Here's some other examples of prestige weapons that we see over here. But you see the inscription on the top of the wall, "A man's inkwell is the water of his life and the cause of his salvation." So that's the other reason why all of these things are written in such a way. On another wall, you'll see this is not a pattern. This is, in fact, a poem written all the way around this eight-pointed star, which is another form of star that's meant to welcome goodness and repel badness. And you see this is called an Augur. It's a particular kind of donkey-ass-related animal. But what is he leaping over? He's leaping over a fish pond. See the two little fish right there? Right there? So there's all these fabulous details interacting with the script. And in this example, also on view in the gallery adjacent to the previous one, you find in the vines all sorts of birds perching and singing. Now, this blue inscription is actually just a part of a sentence. It's sliced from the sentence. It would have been a much, much longer reading. And so all we have is this one fragment because people outside would see this as a work of art in and of itself. But this is just like saying, but with all of that beautiful bird. And we have two in the Newark Museum collection, but only two similar to this, with this wonderful banding up top and the pressing on bottom and the blue calligraphy. But only one of them has the birds in the tendrils behind the calligraphy. The other one does not. And finally, we're going to move on to this next section, fasting for Ramadan. Now, in an exhibition, showing fasting can be difficult. I know there are lots of conceptual exhibitions about showing nothing, but in many ways, fasting really, of course, and fasting in many religious traditions is about providing a special sacred time. But sometimes it's also about the feast that happens after the fast. You know the amazing story, there is no better spice than hunger. And I will say that all the food that I've had that are the most amazing meals I've had in my life are the ones that, in retrospect, I was so hungry for. But this really celebrates the feeling of hospitality, the importance of hospitality. And as it says in the exhibition, hospitality in a Muslim lineage is likened to the relationship with God. So to be a good host, to be a good guest, both of those things relate to your relationship with God. If you are the guest, you are receiving God's love through the host. If you are the host, you are receiving the opportunity to be generous like God to one's guest. And so you're both expected to behave really, really well with each other in order to eventually attain paradise. And what you see here is a lovely dance party, the king in his shaded courtyard, there's a falcon speaking. But when you first come, you also get the opportunity to wash up, which is why we have this ewer and basin on the side. So you are welcome to the home, you're given to wash up. And I wanted to point out about this particular painting, it's not just this fabulous riot of color in the center, it's also subtleties in the border. So can you see this golden long-horned goat ibex, just like the plate? And then underneath it here is a wild boar. So the golden items in this border are like the animals that perhaps this hunting party has hunted to produce their feast. And that's what you also find in these. So here's another wonderful bearded longhorned ibex on a plate. The inscriptions around the edge all talk about blessings. And these are two hunting falcons who are circling a sitting duck. And on their bellies is inscribed the word blessings, because that is the way in which your meal might come to you, is the kind of food that might be plated on these wonderful dishes for your feast. And these, maybe to our sugar-bound eyes now, you wouldn't look at these and think, ooh, something sweet. But this is a honeycomb pattern. Both of these are honeycomb patterns. So it's like having a cupcake drawn on your dessert plate. And if you are familiar with it, that's what you would have. And in fact, at the edge, this is a fish scale pattern. So these dishes are helping you to think about other yummy things that you're going to be eating. And if you look closely, there's actually this wonderful spiral of color in this dish. You see the green and the yellow and the blue and the brown and the red. So there's this kind of psychedelic patterning that the artist has stippled in this honeycomb. In the Newark Museum example, you still have this coffee set here on view, and we showed this is taking coffee in North Africa. So I don't know how many of you prefer an Ethiopian blend of coffee, but if you do, it's because you like where coffee comes from. All coffee in the world began in Ethiopia, and the tradition of drinking coffee is from that moment. And this tray that has a small coffee pot and 2 cups, those cups each have a half of a poem. One might be, I think that I shall never see, and the other cup would be, a poem as beautiful as a tree. So it really demonstrates that that's coffee that's meant to be drunk together. It's meant to be this sense of hospitality. And these plates, while not having food on them, have the floral garden that you would want to perhaps be eating in. And it has this amazing ewer here, this one. This comes from a South Asian tradition. And in the South Asian tradition, you see the kind of duck-like head or goose-like head. This is a celestial goose called a hamsa. And then here is a dragon-like form with a tail for its handle, and a makara, which is a mythical animal that's a cross between an elephant and a crocodile. All three of those animals, the goose, the makara, and the dragon, relate to water. Because they're the form, I mean, when goose migrate, when you think about geese or ducks, obviously they're water creatures, but they also relate to celestial rains. And when you drink from this ewer, that imagery is supposed to be a self-replenishing ewer by having those animals on it. And this sarinda, this musical instrument, is a kind that traveled east and west. But my favorite thing on it is you see the little bird heads here? It's unfolding from a tree that's called a wak-wak tree. And a wak-wak tree is a tree that can produce animals of all nature. So you can grow anything on this tree. But the reason why you have birds on this instrument is because, of course, bird song and musical instruments. So the birds will help amplify music as a form of hospitality. Also in the exhibition, we have this beautiful tambourine with carnations decorating the front. What you can't see in it, in the back, is the inscription of the artist. So this is a calligraphic name of the artist done in the form of a bird. So again, bird song. You also have these ceramics that are made into hookah. Smoking hookah is another way that you would welcome your guests. You would smoke hookah water pipes together. And the front of one side has a tambourine player right there. She's playing the tambourine while the young gentleman is enjoying a woman dancing in front of him. So all very leisurely and celebratory, as is this. This far side is the marriage of Mir and Ma, which literally means the marriage of sun and moon, and east and west. So here the king is overlooking this marriage dance with all of his musicians and all this festival. But this is a story of love unrequited, Manjun and Layla and Case. So she is Layla, and she is greeting what is probably a feminine Sufi saint, she is hoping, bringing her news of her lover, Manjun. Manjun literally means one who has run mad, and he has run mad because they've been forbidden from marrying. And so he is an ascetic in the desert, and she longs for him. But if you look closely at these colored bird pairs, all of these birds have been released from these bird cages right here. So it's showing true and eternal undying love for two people in the birds while she's listening for word of her lover, which is another metaphor for the soul's yearning for love from the divine. So it has multiple levels that way. Continuing on with modest beauty, dress, fashions, and faith, we have this beautiful hair ornament. This is actually the back of the ornament. You see all that beautiful enameling, and this is the front encrusted with diamonds, and it's worn on this side of the head. And it's specific to Muslim women in northern India as a form of hair ornament. But you see in here some familiar figures of the eight-pointed star here, the hand of Fatima here and here. You'll see a crescent moon here, and then you have two peacocks. This is a peacock on one side and a peacock on another side. Peacocks also are signs of love because the peacock calls to dance as the monsoon rain comes. And so whenever you see peacocks prancing, you will hear the call of love. I understand soon you will have a beautiful exhibition coming from Jodhpur called Peacock in the Desert. And so that is the proud, beautiful male peacock, although in the desert, calling for love and calling for the rains of the monsoon. And this amazing necklace is actually made for a man, and you can see the crescent moon decoration around the bottom, the vizier, because jewelry is not just a feminine property, and fine dressing certainly isn't just for women, as these two amazing costumes or coats show. The far one is from Kashmir, and the near one is from Qajar period Iran. And these, both luxury garments, show also imports between different regions, so that this wool is actually probably woven in Kashmir and sent to Iran and then fashioned into a coat in Iran. And these prestige swords are from Indonesia and the Philippines, and this has a tree of life motif on the scabbard, as well as a tree of life motif and geometric portions here. But my favorite one is this example. Oops, there we go. Sorry, you got a preview. So you have a tree of life on the scabbard. You see this fabulous snake-like blade. Well, it's snake-like for two reasons. One is the power and venom of a snake, and usually those blades were poisoned, so all you had to do was to slash someone with the poison. But the other thing is that that's my timer, letting me know, almost. If you are punctured with a blade that is wavy, it will not heal as well. A straight cut actually will heal better, so that has a double power to it. This style of blade potentially predates Islam in Indonesian regions, but continued on as a status symbol. And one of my favorite things about how powerful and beautiful these objects are is that shape on the top of the scabbard, which is a boat shape. So it's literally like boats sailing between all of the different islands of the archipelago. And if boats and your hip ornaments weren't enough, you could also pimp your ride. This is a cape meant for a horse. So if you have a Maserati that you want to have a really smashing cover for, this is what this would do. And on the one hand, you've got sequins on this side and fringe. The underside is this spectacular ikat, this wonderful tie-dyed ikat, for those of you who don't know, is a moment where you actually tie and dye the string before you weave the garment. And so the reason why the lines look a little offset is because of that dyeing process. And what you see when you look closely, this is a poppy. So this is a field of poppies on the back of the horse. And if you don't believe me, there it is, right there on the horse. So that's a very fab horse in Uzbekistan. Wrapping up, we're actually, as I said, going backwards in time with this talk. This particular carpet is one of the best in the world of its type. And what it shows you, of course, is not just a flower garden around the edge, and the mihrab, which is the part within a mosque that shows you the direction of Mecca, the direction that all the faithful pray. And the direction of Mecca, of course, changes depending on where you are in the globe. And so what you need is you don't need a mosque to pray. You don't even need a prayer rug, but you need a clean space, and you need the direction and the time of day in which to face Mecca. And that's what this Astrolabe helps you with. This is the original smartphone. It's a particular app that shows you both the direction of Mecca and the times of day that you should pray. But if you're well-to-do and you have a gorgeous prayer rug like this that has within it it's actually both a mihrab for that direction and the gates to paradise, and it has within it its libation vessels. You see the two red and blue pitchers, because you also have to ritually wash yourself before you pray so that you are clean for your 5 prayers a day. I think I've over-talked, so I'm going to speed through because I want to get to a really important point. This tent panel made in Egypt is a part of the temporary dwelling and part of a massive part of architecture that you don't normally see in this form. It's almost died out, but this was commissioned by our founder in the 1920s. And you can see how it looks like stained glass or other kinds of woodwork. There are arches down here. The inscription here I've translated, so you can see this is your fab party tent. You would rent these for weddings or even for celebrations of promotion. This amazing portrait of Aurangzeb, one of the most devout emperors of India, reading his Quran for one of those prayers 5 times a day. But in the background here, you see the elephant procession leaving the fort, which is another way to look at architecture in Islam. This is one of my favorite pieces. This is a Pakistani tile, and for those of you who like the garden club, you can see here's a lotus, and here's an iris, and here's a daffodil, and here's another iris, and here's another daffodil, and here's a carnation, and here's another daffodil. So there's so many different flowers coming out of the same stalk to show that kind of verdant glory. And on this Iznik plate, you'll see blue tulips and carnations and red hyacinths and this leaf called a saz leaf. So it really is giving you this wonderful range of flora. And here you have the moaning cowherd seeing the lion attacking his cow. And good, now I'm where I want to be in the times of time. So the pillar of Zakat, or charity, or almsgiving, these are two different bowls. One was collected in Algeria by our founder. The other one was definitely made in Iran. And you can see there's a dervish. You see the little hat and the man here, and there's another dervish smoking a hookah pipe here. These are coco de mer, a particular kind of shell coming from the Seychelles Islands. And this kind of shell would then wash ashore on Saudi Arabia and the banks of Africa and Asia. And so the inscriptions on these bowls talk about being, actually, I want to read you the inscription because it's such a good inscription. And it's such a fascinating moment because it's already an exotic natural form that is being transformed. Dervishes don't beg for themselves, they beg to give to others. So it's this other form of charity. It's a charity that is writ large, as large as possible. And the inscription on this near one reads, "We shout with loud voices. We do not hide the secret from anyone. Universal are the waves of the sea. Waves and the sea are the same. Where is there a single water drop? There is only one, no other. No one else. Only He. He is the one. There is no other God. Only He." So it's really showing that metaphor through the seashell coming from the ocean, and that we all relate to that. No single drop of water, that here as a community in this room, that we are all one together. And this form of charity, I especially in the wake of Harvey and the storm, I was really inspired. These are a number of mosques here in Houston, and many of them opened their doors to help as relief shelters after Harvey, and that's another part of the pillar, this charity and help and assistance. And it's just part of the mosques of the world. And so I'm going to do a little reverse slideshow for you of mosques of the world, beginning here in Houston, and then going to, okay, have you guessed where this is? And we're going to do a reverse chronology too. So you have a moment to look at and then guess the date and time. We got some people who already know where they are. Well done. This is one of my favorites. Good guess. Indonesia's coming, don't worry. No, close. Brunei. I love this one. This one I think is a very interesting story because it was also built after World War I to honor the Muslim fighters who fought on the Allied side in World War I. So there's also that other special relationship. So this is before our revolution, of course, 1766. And I'm amazed at how close in date this one is. Yeah, good job. You got Delhi, excellent. Well done. Oh, we have a winner. Okay, this one? Good guess. You got China, Yunnan. Yunnan still has a very large Islamic population. 15th century Bangladesh, so cool. This is one of my favorites. Amazing, right? That's the color of those domes. That was one of the reasons we did the colors of our walls for the exhibition that way. You got this one. Good job. If you ever want to watch a great YouTube video of people replastering this with mud, it's a whole community. You know, all of these timbers that are sticking out are where people climb up to reface the mosque. Really amazing. Yeah, 1250, right? Amazing. Cairo, well done. So it's this minaret, this circle that the Renaissance artists are looking at for the Tower of Babel. Guesses? Cordoba, well done, well done. $742, Xi'an. Yep. Palestine or Jerusalem, exactly. And now we come to where it all starts. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.